I greet you all and welcome you to the lesson. The subject is auditing and assurance. Today we are going to study two things: audit objective and audit scope. Determining audit objective and scope. And these two candidates are very crucial steps in planning a governance and compliance audit, because particularly determining the objective scope sets the direction for the entire audit engagement. It also ensures that the audit is focused, the audit is efficient, and also provides valuable insights to the management and also the stakeholders. So in the process of auditing, it's important at the initial phase to determine the audit objective. Determining the audit objective, in other words, is finding out why, answering the question, the why of the audit. What is the why of the audit? And it defines the audit, it defines what the audit is intended to achieve, and therefore a clear and precise and measurable objective is also very essential for successful audit. So the question now is, what are some of the various objectives of a governance and compliance audit? And one such objective is to assess compliance. The reason why governance and compliance audits are conducted is so that the auditor can assess compliance. It is to assess whether the company is complying with various laws, regulations, internal policies, industry standards, and so on. That is the first objective, because we know companies operate in highly regulated environments. Companies are required to adhere to various laws, environmental laws, corporate company law. We have taxation laws. We have the company may also have its own internal policies which it should also adhere to. So a governance and compliance audit may be conducted to assess whether the company is complying with such laws and regulations, in order to determine if the companies, for example, data handling practices comply with the data protection laws, environmental laws, labor laws, and so on. That is the first audit objective. The second audit objective is to evaluate the effectiveness of controls. It is to evaluate the effectiveness of controls. This objective goes beyond simple compliance and looks at whether the controls are designed to ensure compliance are actually working as intended. Every company has internal controls. Okay? It could be controls over the assets, controls over sales, controls over cash, controls over accounts receivables, controls over accounts payables. The compliance audit may be conducted to evaluate whether such controls are functioning or working as intended. That is to assess the effectiveness of internal controls for mitigation of risk of financial fraud and so on. So to evaluate effectiveness of controls. That's the second objective. The third objective of a compliance audit is to identify and mitigate risks. This is the third reason why a compliance audit may be carried out. It is to identify if there are any risks and also to mitigate such risks that are identified. And this objective focuses on proactively identifying areas of vulnerability. Examples include identifying potential governance and compliance risk associated with a new business venture or even a new technology implementation and so on. Number 4, to promote good governance. To promote good governance. This is a broader strategic objective. It is to provide assurance that the organization's governance framework is sound. A compliance audit may be carried out to find out if the organization's governance framework is sound. If it is sound, and also if it supports the organization's mission and values. And examples would be to assess the effectiveness of the board's oversight of risk management and compliance. It could be to evaluate whether the corporate governance framework is transparent, whether it promotes accountability, and so on. So these are 4 audit objectives. 4 audit objectives. Now let's discuss the audit scope. That is audit objective. Then let's have a look at the audit scope. The audit scope. Now the scope is now the what and the where of the audit. The audit objective is the why of the audit. The audit scope is the what and where of the audit, and it defines the boundaries of the audit. It defines what will be done, what will be examined, and therefore a well-defined scope prevents what we call scope creep and ensures that the audit team focuses on the most critical areas. So scope is simply the boundary. What will be examined, what will not be examined, defines what is to be examined. In the process of auditing, what areas will be covered. That is the scope of the audit. And therefore, candidates, what are some of the factors to consider when defining scope? Now, when defining scope, one important factor to consider is the relevant regulations and standards. Relevant regulations and standards. When determining the boundary of an audit, it's very critical to check the regulations and standards. The scope must directly be tied to the audit objective, first of all. And if the objective is to assess maybe data compliance, data protection compliance, then the scope must include all departments, systems, and processes that handle the areas that are being examined. All right. So one important factor to consider when determining the scope of an audit is relevant regulations and standards. Number 2 is organizational and geographical boundaries. Organizational and geographical boundaries. Here, the auditors must explicitly define the business units, departments, their locations, if there are any subsidiaries. That has to be identified. For example, will the audit cover only the corporate headquarters or all regional offices? Those are some of the factors that will determine the scope of the audit. All right, geographical and organizational boundaries. 3, time period. The time periods also define the scope of an audit. It's important here to specify the periods the audit will cover. It could be the last fiscal year or specific quarter or a specific project timeline. 4, systems and processes. Systems and processes may also define the scope of the audit. Here, the auditors have to identify the specific systems, applications, and also business processes that are in scope. And this could include specific enterprise resource planning. It may also include financial reporting processes, and so on. It could be customer relationship management, database, etc. Another factor that determines scope is materiality. Materiality is a factor that has to be considered. Materiality and risk. So the scope should be guided by risk assessment, because high-risk areas should be included in the scope for a more thorough examination. So we have here materiality and risk. Those areas that are considered to be risky have to be within the scope of the audit. So when determining the scope of the audit, look at risk. High-risk areas must be included. Low-risk areas may be excluded or subject to less intensive review. 5. Exclusions and limitations. Exclusions and limitations is also a factor to consider. Here, the auditors have to clearly state what is not included in the scope. The auditors, in defining the scope, must also come up with a statement indicating that they are not going to cover certain areas in the process of conducting governance and compliance audit. For example, the auditor may say that the audit will not cover the company's marketing operations, or the audit will not include an assessment of recently acquired subsidiary, or it may not include internal controls, and so on. So that also determines the scope of the audit. Determines the scope of the audit. So that is all, candidates, for our today's lesson on determining audit objective and scope. In this lesson, we have discussed 4 audit objectives. 1 is assessing compliance. Number 2, to evaluate effectiveness of controls. Number 3, identify and mitigate risks. Number 4 is to promote good governance. Then we have discussed the factors that may determine the scope. And recall, we said that the scope looks at the what of the audit and the where of the audit. Audit objectives covers the why of the audit. And in discussing the scope, we've identified 6 factors that determine the scope or the boundary of the audit. 1 is relevant regulations and standards. Number 2, organization and geographical boundaries. Number 3, time periods. Number 4, systems and processes. Number 5, materiality and risk. Number 6, exclusions and limitations. Thank you for attending the lesson. We will continue to share knowledge in our next session. Bye-bye.